Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us like our spirituality with a twist. Okay, so we're continuing on with this kind of stretch run of this long series of episodes we've been talking about, a lot about love and relationships and all kinds of stuff like that. We're in the final parts of this, trying to end it on a special note, hopefully. We got back to talking about different styles of relationships. We got to talking about Carl Jung and a little bit about maybe polyamory. Polyamory is kind of a complicated subject, so we're going to have some guests on to talk about it. But somewhere in that frame. But really, even shifting gears to I think something else in the last episodes here, which is really trying to present a certain way of thinking about how one develops one's own vision of the world or something. So I have an anecdote. It's always good to start with an anecdote. So I thought I'd just tell it real quick, Daniel, and give me your 2 cents on this. So
Sure.
I had a student who had written me a really nice letter as she was graduating a bit ago. And I had always meant to like write back and say, hey, thanks, that was so thoughtful. You get these things occasionally, but this was a particularly thoughtful one. I say thank you to all of them, but this was a really nice one. But at the time, it was when my uncle was really sick. It was right during that period of time when I was like taking care of my uncle, which was, a bit ago last year. And so I just got distracted. I never got around to doing this. There was just so much health management things to do with a sick relative. And so it occurred to me like, oh, I really want to do that. So I wrote her, but when she was graduating, she also asked me this question. And the question was something like, and this was in person, like last few days of her being on campus or something. She asked, either it was something like, how long did it take you to get your life together? Or when did you know your life was together? Something like that. And we being who we are, and as anyone who has listened to any episodes, we're not going to let a question like that go with an easy answer. So I was sort of like, well, if you want me to answer honestly, it depends on what you mean by together.
Right.
Together means different things for different people.
Yeah.
And I kind of made the point about like, it depends on what you want. Some things are easier to put together and some things are harder to put together. It depends on what the circumstances, socially or culturally, especially being presented with. So, and that's been the theme of these episodes. If you want what vibes with the cultural expectations and that works for you, then it's probably easier to put stuff together. If you want something different deep down intrinsically, then it's going to take more effort to put the thing together. But I wrote her back and I said, thanks for the letter and thanks for the question, because it's a really good question. And I said, I think about it a lot for the podcast. And I actually said I would mention it in this episode in the email because I think it's a really great question. And I said, well, I may kind of tried to make 2 points. One was, you don't really know whose stuff is together from the outside. You don't have any clue. And I brought up the example of like in the past week, I've had 3 conversations about different people I know who are either going through divorces or are trying to get out of relationships and are having a hard time getting out of these divorces. And it's like 3 different women. And it's interesting because they're all relatively professionally and successfully, financially successful in different ways. And it's hard. They're just having a really hard time figuring out how to handle this. There's kids involved. It's really messy. And I suppose I'll leave it there. But like literally people crying and it's like, oh, just, it's been one of those little windows. And it happens. You go through these windows where like, people are struggling. Obviously it happens all the time. So, and I was trying to make the point, like if you were checking in from the outside, you wouldn't know anything of that. You wouldn't know that from social media. You wouldn't know that from things that person's going through that stuff. You'd have no clue. And if you're on the outside looking in at that, you think, well, everyone else has all their stuff together and I don't. You don't know. You have no idea, right? And afterwards you find out, oh, I thought that was together. It wasn't. So that's part of it I wanted to say. And the other thing I wanted to say, which will get us into our episode, I thought, although I like your feedback on all of this and what you think of that question. But I had this, like, I was really trying to say, like, all I can really say for myself is I found there were major ways that I didn't want to do the same thing as the culture wanted me to do. That was partially spiritual, partially professionally, partially interpersonally, how I felt about love and relationship and things. So, and I just mentioned those in the letter real quick. But that's me. Other people will feel different about this. But I said, for me, this is how it was. And no matter what, trying to like express my own thought, vision, feeling, and so on of what I thought that should be was the most important thing I ever did. Like that's it, no doubt. And it's the only thing that I would say made anything seem together or made anything seem like happy. This was the source of happiness to do this. And so I said, you don't know if things are going to work out easily or something. I don't want to be naive about it and just say, I think I said something like, follow your dreams, Pinocchio, and then you'll be a real boy or something. It's not like that. Just to be, I don't know, a soporific, you might say, just to give something that's just like bleh, just some bland thing. But I was like, even in the times when it's difficult, and I still don't know if I have this together totally, so I try. But the fact of my trying to put it together, and the fact of me trying to pursue what seems like a true and authentic vision of how I see things is like the most important thing I've ever done. And so in these episodes, I thought, well, this is kind of the closer on this. And I'm partially referencing back to Jung because it almost seems like he has similar questions, got to similar places as some of us who have spiritual inclinations. But it is like, I think it's an episodes about that set of questions. I'll throw it back to you. That was my anecdotal thing. That's the episode. What do you think?
Yeah. So I think, if I was able to address this person or to whoever's listening, if they're pondering this question for themselves, then you have to ask yourself, really, what does that mean to have your shit together, if we can say that, right? So if you look at someone looks at you or whomever and says, oh, when did you know you had your shit together? And my response was, well, what makes you think I have my shit together? You know what I'm saying? Not to be necessarily facetious, but to be like actually genuine and say, okay, based on your view of my life and my beingness, what leads you to believe that I have it more together than you do?
Well, in a certain sense, what she's asking. She's basically talking about something very standard, I think. And that's when I gave her the answer. She kind of laughed, like, "Oh, you're gonna give me one of those answers?" And I was like, "Well, you asked me this question,
right?
You told me the answer you're gonna get."
Yeah.
But she was talking about something like, just getting your ducks arranged in your life on some basic level, which you have to do, but I don't know if that even counts as getting your shit together.
Right. So that's the question is, one, what do you think that means for you? And then two, okay, when we have those kind of answers in order, what is the priority? And then you can look at how someone's quote unquote shit is together based on those priorities. So if someone's priorities is to be in a successful marriage and that's their relation and that's their shit together, then that's it, right? They have a relationship, maybe they have kids or whatever, but that's the primary goal. And then, they work and they support themselves, but the relationship is the driving force. If somebody has a career-oriented view of the world or view of their life, then they're going to be focused on that. And of course, they still might have a relationship or relationships, whatever, but they're going to be career focused and they'll be willing to sacrifice if that gets in the way or something else like this. If somebody is artistically driven or spiritually driven or,
parentally driven,
right? Yeah. And these are the questions, these are the core kind of questions that we have been addressing since the inception of this podcast. Actually, these are the things that we wanted to talk about and address. And
on the one hand, talk about like spiritual teachings. On the other hand, talk about practical application, right?
Yeah.
It was trying the melding of those two things.
Yeah. But then all of that woven in with the practicalities of being a normal individual, and living in this lifetime. Right. Yeah. And I think one of the other questions that we talked about, which we have done, but we haven't done it justice really, is like talking about how people allocate their time, which is essentially what we're doing. We're saying
every episode has that.
Yeah.
Like, could be a separate thing. You're fascinated by time now anyways, though, because you're doing all this Zen stuff. So time.
Yeah. Like, it's like, okay, well, how do you allocate your time? Are you allocating it towards, like I said, your relationship, your work, your children, your creativity, whatever it is you're allocating your time towards? This, in my mind, would be, quote unquote, getting someone's shit together. Because if you want to, let's just say, be an artist, well, if you can orient your life in such a way that your artwork can support you to eat and have a place to live and possibly exist in a relationship, then your life is together, regardless of how your house looks, of how everything else looks and how you get paid. That is your goal. So I think, in like sort of summation for this question, which I think is a really good one. And by the way, I do like getting questions from people. And if you are feeling like you want to be, part of the conversation, please feel free, hit us up at GinandTantra@gmail.com. Leave a question in the Instagram. We're active on that thing. Or leave a question in a YouTube link. We're definitely down to do this because it brings up different ways of talking about stuff. That then, to be able to ask these kinds of questions is really important. And then when you come up with the answer that's unique for you, then you can start to orient yourself around that answer and then make your life your own. Even if it looks totally the same, at least you have the thought behind it, as opposed to just rolling into it unconsciously because that's what you saw your parents or the rest of everybody else doing.
Yeah. Which actually gets perfectly into the Jung stuff of this too,
Of course
right?
it does, Eric.
It's a good transition, Daniel.
You're welcome.
uh, it's
Baby
all about
llamas.
it's all about the professionalism.
That's 100%. And baby llamas from New Zealand. So we'll,
This is Daniel's dream about baby llamas from New Zealand.
that's right.
Um,
I do like making random abstract references with absolutely no frame for anybody to
want to fill in the Jungian dream context.
Yeah.
The prophetic dream of not like baby llamas, like little babies, but actual.
Mm-hmm.
I know what sound llamas make. Bah. I know what they make.
I don't know. Yeah, they were from New Zealand, so they had a little bit of an
accent.
Yeah.
Bah, mate.
Yeah, there you go. Drink it.
So to set like a kind of so part of the idea was like to go through it. When I thought about it, the worldview what made the Buddhist goddesses happy in me talking about this, and we talked about this a little bit last week. The Buddhist goddesses, well, one in particular, my one dissenting Buddhist goddess who wasn't happy with me, got happier because I was like, well, I'm going to present a vision. I'm not going to say something critical or something. I'm going to present a vision of like a different way of thinking, just because it opens up the idea of like everyone then can like think about this for themselves. You don't have to agree with me or us or you, Daniel, or anybody in particular. You can go through and just think about what it's like to create a vision. And, talking about how each of us has done this is helpful for other people who are trying to do the same. And I suppose in the end, it's something like I've been very strongly influenced by like Buddhist tantric, Taoist, Zen, Sufi ways of thinking about the world, Kabbalistic ways of thinking about the world. And so that's my vision of things. And I want my life to reflect that vision. And then, and then the reason to talk about Jung is because he had his own quest in this way too. And there's no doubt he likes questiness because he likes talking about the Grail myth and stuff. He thinks there's a questiness to this.
Mm-hmm.
So in the framing of this, we said, okay, first of all, we wanted to talk about enlightenment as kind of a goal, whatever that means. I mean, different things to different people, but certainly I got that as a goal, right? And I feel like that's kind of like an overall goal that runs through everything, And I think if you set that as your goal, well, then that starts to just influence everything. It starts to pull everything along in that direction. And then probably you'll think differently about your work and your relationships or your other parts of your life, right? How you think of as a parent and so on, right? You're going to think differently. Then we said Jung obviously went through this, right? He came up to a similar conclusion, right? At some point of his life, he had his epiphanous moments. We talked about that last week. And then he also got to the point, which I think is about where we were kind of at with this, where he realized like, oh, this is going to cause me some problems because it's obvious I'm embracing a vision of the world that doesn't match the culture around me. So he had that realization for sure. And he framed it in a weird way. He said like, well, there's morals, which he was saying are the things that have to do with what the culture has, which could be right or wrong, right? Some parts might be right, some parts are wrong. And then he said like, there's ethics. And ethics are asking me to do something higher. But he acknowledges I'm a little afraid of this. And he does this really interesting thing at some point. He asks himself these questions. He talks about it in the Remy's Dreams Reflections, where he says something like, I had to ask myself this tough question. Is there a myth and is there a guiding myth in my culture? And he said, well, I guess it's supposed to be the Christian myth. Okay. So he said, well, that seems to be the guiding myth. That's probably the guiding myth for American culture too.
Yeah.
If you had to dig down deep, it's the guiding myth. And then he had to ask himself, well, do I believe in this myth in that way anymore? And he had to say, no, I don't. And he also asked a deeper question, like, do I think this myth even works anymore? That's a deeper question. But on a personal level, I think he seemed to be like, no, I don't think I believe in this anymore, which then meant he had to like go and say, well, I'm going to have to come up with some other myth, some other story for my life. Story being used in a powerful way there. Like you need a certain narrative to your life. That's your myth. That's your story. And he recognized like, okay, the story that I have in the culture where I'm from doesn't match me anymore. And so now I'm going to have to do something different. And it gets a little bit to like kind of what we were talking about before, so sort of the sociological and the anthropological of this, right?
Before you go there, Eric,
yeah,
you were mentioning like having for you enlightenment as being this sort of major guiding force in your life when we're you were creating your own vision for yourself, you know?
Yeah, I think that just kind of like I realized, oh, I feel this way. And other people do, like you tell Jung felt this way too. You just realize that's who you are on some level.
Yeah. And then, so then I'm just thinking about, people who are listening, this, the several hundred, the small, tight knit group of several 100,000 people who are, dedicated followers of the way.
Uh-huh.
But, for people who have various relationships with that word, with that idea, based on cultural, religious, based on their own influences, you know what I'm saying? And I think what I wanted to point out is that, like, even if that is not your goal, like as an individual, but having a goal or having work that transcends your time until your time is extinguished in this incarnation is akin to that kind of ideology or that kind of aspiration, if you will. So if it's to paint the most perfect river, or make the most perfect guitar riff ever, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
you're still working on some kind of act of perfection, if you will, or continual act of like whittling away at the wood, that we are in some sense. That I think that, like you said, it transcends. It doesn't present problems, but it can present moments that you can learn when you're juxtaposed to a culture that is not really has a lot of foresight into it. You know what I'm saying? And it's all about like momentary kind of short attention span type shit, right? Quick fix type thing. But that when people hold this to them, it sort of guides the waypoint even further down the road. Even if you get into your own life and your own job or whatever, you still have, like you personally and myself included, we still have this larger vision that is transcending even those particular things. Yes, those are creative and compassionate endeavors that we are doing, but they also run parallel to the other thing, which is to this constant work on something else. So even if it's not enlightenment for somebody who that word or that thing doesn't fit with them just yet, having some vision that transcends all the other pieces for your life, I think is important to have. Even if it shifts as your life moves on, you're still aiming on working on something that transcends all of your other work, if that makes sense.
I guess I got two things that are kind of like personal responses to it. One would be you might not like the word enlightenment, you might like another word. That's cool. I think at the beginning of, again, his autobiography, Jung goes, my life is a story of the self-realization of the unconscious. Later on, he'll call that enlightenment. But that's what that meant to him. Like, no judgment about that at all, whatever that means to you. He's obviously talking about something that's like a psychospiritual goal for sure. Now, as just a personal reaction, like very personal, like I can get the idea of wanting to do the perfect guitar riff.
Yeah, there you go.
I play guitar. Is it Led Zeppelin's Kashmir? Has it already been written? It's hard to say. But maybe you can come up with something better. I don't know what it would be. That's kind of a fantastic riff. But whatever whatever floats your boat with those things. The one thing I can say is I do have a little personal thing. Like I think there's something about psychospiritual actualization or something that is its own unique force.
Yep.
And all I can say is for myself, trying to come up with the best riff I can is in the service of this other thing.
Sure.
And so I just want to throw that out as a possibility. Yeah. Like you could go to like, I saw Ravi Shankar a few times before he died. He did like 7 farewell concerts, and I think it was at each and every one. He would hop a lot onto the stage and then just rock it on this sitar, and I've always had like a soft spot for that idea that, the artistic creative works, the familial works, the relational works, your professional work, all get subsumed under this deeper momentum. So I guess that would be my pitch. So it's something that's worthwhile thinking about. But if you're not into that, I mean, there's no judgment for sure, right? If you're like, no, I want to write the perfect guitar riff, fuck that shit, then I would be like, okay, I respect it. Yeah. Come up with something better than Purple Haze at some point, and you can like put it into the garage band, and that'll be an accomplishment. And I actually am sincere in that. I'm not even being sarcastic.
No, I mean it.
I mean it. So anyways, but I think that's the thing. I think it's this, and that's maybe the theme of the episode. The reason to lead with the enlightenment thing to my mind is like, okay, this is the underlying pulse, the heartbeat of the whole project or something. And then the other things are all the different places where the rest of that flows or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. I had a little bit about this that I thought was a little bit important, which was, you know, part of the questioning thing happens then is that you're also probably questioning a little bit the reality of the social conditions around you.
For sure.
I talk about this a lot, so I don't want to dwell on it too much, but there's like a Buddhist term for this, which is called conventional truths. Sometimes they call them concealer truths or truths for a concealer. And what they mean is that, and Jung seems to be kind of like jutting up against this idea like, well, there's a truth for the culture in which I'm living, but that's not an ultimate truth. That's just how people in this particular place think about things. And and okay, I'm not in line with that anymore. Yeah, my life is not in line with that anymore. And what really struck me in my experience of this is that I came to this feeling like there's almost like a multi-layer reality system or something, where there's sort of like a social level of reality, a sociocultural level of reality, and then there's the transcendent levels of reality. And I don't know if those, from my way of thinking, and you're curious about your opinion, but I don't know if those transcendent ways of thinking care much about these social ways of thinking.
Mm.
Now, I know that people may not agree with that. You know, obviously you can have like a religious or spiritual view that says, oh, Moses gave these commandments, we're supposed to follow them and all that, you know, and if that works for you, that's cool. But I don't believe that personally, you know. I don't I don't believe in a divinity that asks for those things. I don't think that's true. I think that's just like a certain sociocultural interpretation of how people are going to live. If you believe it, no judgment, but I don't, that doesn't seem true to me. And I think those are things that human beings are doing amongst themselves, you know. And a lot of times there's a disconnect between what the bigger universe is doing. I was trying to talk to a patient about this, and I said something like, you know, the universe doesn't care about this stuff. You know, I don't think it cares about this stuff at all, you know. And again, you know, I'm presenting a view. So this is the view I'm presenting here. I think in Zen they have this phrase that says energy before form.
Mm-hmm.
The energy is the more transcendent aspects of reality. It has its own mojo going on for sure. It has its own idea of what things are. And then there's the social level of things, right? And you know, that's just different. And I think I was going back all the way back to, like, we talked about Joseph Campbell sometimes on here, and that was like what I got when I was a teenager. He talked about the temptations of the Buddha, and the third one, which just hit me like a shot, because I was already thinking thoughts like this. He said, well, the third one that really almost gets him is like, well, what about like what your social duties are and what everyone says you're supposed to be doing? And what about all those roles that you're supposed to be committed to? You're supposed to be this and this and this and this. And he says, no, I don't want that, which I think Jung went through too. But he got to some point where he's like, no, I don't want to, these aren't real for me anymore. I don't believe in these anymore in the same way I believe in what's coming from some higher level of reality, which for him would probably be the collective unconscious or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a force. And so I guess that's, you know, one of the main points of the Taoists and the Tantrikas and the Sufis and the Gnostics and pretty much any mystical person you can name, that you could talk about this distinction. So I wanted to just throw that, I wanted to include that in this because obviously I feel that very strongly.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as we're each going to create our visions, that's like no doubt part of my vision. Like energy before form, that's like quintessential for me. And then other people can make their own decisions about this. But, you know, since we're talking about what it means to try to form something like this for ourselves,
Right.
that's what I would say about it if I was talking honest.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a major question. You can ask yourself these questions like, do you believe in something that you would call enlightenment? What would that mean to you? You know, and then how do you think that fits into the idea of like whatever's the more conventional truth level of reality? Do you believe that there's this kind of thing where there's differences? And not everybody has to think this, but you know, I do. So, all right. So what do you got in the net? Everything we're saying here is multiple episodes long. But anyways, we're going through it.
Yeah, no, I think,
Like trying to present the vision.
You want to make it practical, right? So for people, I think that's kind of like, for us anyways, different people who are going to talk about like how to orient your life are probably going to start somewhere different, right? So Jordan Peterson character is probably going to say like, do you have a job or something like this? You know, like I don't.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you make your bed that morning?
Right. Yeah. Did you shave? You know.
Did you do basic hygiene?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is good, okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Nothing wrong with that. You need
That's
basic
fine.
hygiene.
No problem. I'm gonna take my the nose of the airplane and raise it just a little bit. I want to actually take off the ground. I don't want to use the airplane as a fucking Honda Civic. So that's me. You know what I'm saying? Like that's
Yeah. Yeah. You're
uh,
shooting up. You're shooting up for higher skies.
yeah.
Yeah.
We just I want to see the city from
I was
above the city.
over to the 7-Eleven around the corner.
Yeah, no, we're taking it.
I'll turn this plane back around.
I'll turn this plane back around. We're gonna go pick up a Frosty from Wendy's. We'll be right back.
Yeah.
Yeah, no. So I mean, I think
The irony of this whole thing is this is imminently practical to me.
This is
To
imminently
see
practical.
the world like on two different levels is imminently practical.
Correct.
But, it's going to vibe with different people in different ways.
For sure. So, okay, so you have this kind of like, we'll say spiritually minded ideology or spiritually minded infusion of life vision, right? And so to you then, and to me, the first question is like, what is enlightenment? What does it mean to me? Or if somebody wants to ask the question, is there a God? What does it mean to me? What does that mean to me? You can do similar kind of thing. How do you want to be closer to the source? We're splitting hairs with the differences. And then, like you said, everything else that you do then is an emanation from that curiosity, right? From the attempts to blend those two, your passion for experiences, which is our definition of curiosity, and the sort of slow, kind of methodical, merit-based efforts that you put towards that, the desire for union, and then your regular life, and then what comes out of that work, right? What comes out of that work? Does artwork come out of that work? Does helping other people come out of that work? Does coding for Google come out of that work? I'm like, it's in the tantric statement that always fits. It's not what you do, but how you do it. How do you do it? And so if you're coming from this place of a desire for, transcendence, or for union, or for a realization, or for curiosity, to have some of your questions, the burning of your questions quelled a little bit in your lifetime, then your work is a manifestation of that. So to if I can speak for you, this is infinitesimally practical, because that is the ground from which you are working with, as opposed
it's also
to
like the quintessential difference between happiness and unhappiness, as far as I can tell. It might not work for anybody else.
It might not.
Or it might not work for everybody else. It's going to work for somebody.
For sure. Well, but so
whatever you decide about that. But all I can say is, if someone asks me honestly, what's the difference between happiness and unhappiness? It's this.
Yeah.
Having a vision, framing it, and living your life as true as you can.
And so
you can't get everything in order right away, but you
right.
try to. I didn't mean to kill your buzz, and you were flowing, and I didn't mean to kill your flow.
No, good. So I mean, I think the difference is then like having this as your destination, right? So everybody knows GPS. Everybody has GPS, and everyone knows I love analogies. So here's another one. This is the destination, and having the destination, then everything along the way becomes part of the journey. And I think looking at it at the kind of other way, which we'll use 2 for now because we can't argue 1,500 points on here, but we'll use the other way, which is the culmination of like, okay, got it. Make sure you do good hygiene. Make sure you brush your teeth. All right, then get a job, get dressed like a man or a woman or whatever the hell you want, whatever, dress like a person, right? That fits, and people know that you're a worker, and that's what you do. You work, and then you make money. You just sort of, you go piece by piece by piece by piece. Like, you're going to do that anyways. And yes, there are some people whose like their life is in such a way that they have to have a very strong foundation for them in order to be able to even talk about having time to go take a walk when the sun is setting to experience some nice colors, like they have to do all these things and have to be taught how to do these things first. Unfortunately, and this is the point in which I don't want to be exclusionary, but I could say maybe a little bit in our kind of work here, that we are talking to those people, but I don't know that those people are listening to us, which to me, which is why I always try and stop and pause and connect to that mind, because I feel like we are not speaking different languages, my friends. We're not speaking different languages. We're speaking the same language. It's just I'm aiming further, knowing that I'm going to hit multiple targets along the way. I don't need to aim 5 feet in front of me in order to go 50 feet. I can aim 30 feet and then hit the things as I get there. That's kind of what I'm saying.
Well, in a certain sense, you and Christian were doing these workshops for men.
Yeah, we
And
still do. We have one coming up this weekend.
yeah, awesome. Right. Good to plug it.
Mhm.
So let people know it's out there. So, if you look at like Jordan Peterson, who but okay.
I'll
If you look
dump on him, it's fine.
if you look at him, like his goal is to get people up to some certain level of functioning.
Yeah.
Right. And his goal isn't to like, and that's fine. But his goal isn't to like help you like realize the deepest parts of who you are or something. That's not his goal. His goal is to like try to like I mean, from a cynical point of view, his goal is to like help you fit into the society so you can become a little cog in a machine, to be honest. That's his goal. And you can like function within that in a relatively functional way. And maybe that's like like gets you out of a certain kind of dysfunction. But like you're saying, like I think the closer is good. If you just kind of set a deeper vision of who you are, you're going to hit a lot of targets along the way. That's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. Those targets are going to get hit. All right. So, as they say,
before you move on, Eric, it just reminds me when I was in the Army that, we'd be on the range shooting our rifles at targets, and they would say, targets coming up, knock them down. And so,
yeah, that's what it is. Yeah. Okay. So then, since we were talking about this in the context of like love and relationships, what is love?
That's right. Hadaway.
Is that who that is?
That's the guy. That's the guy.
I was trying to come up with like better reference than that, but I couldn't think of anything out of my head.
I'm sure that
song. Love is. Yeah.
I'm sure that song has probably 1 billion views on YouTube, so it's probably a good, reference.
Yeah, all you need is love. So, okay, so I think when you look at Jung, it's certainly one of the most fascinating things about him, and I've hopefully shared this in these episodes, is if you really understand what was happening in his life on more of a personal level, it really gives you a deeper insight into who he was and probably why he was thinking what he was thinking. Because there's no doubt there's a way of thinking about him. And whether I write a book about this, I don't know. But I've done the research for it. And you're like, yeah, there's no doubt that like what he was experiencing in his relationships and in love was influencing almost everything that was happening in all of his psychological thinking. And really, how could it not? Because those are powerful experiences, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as we talked about, as powerful as any ayahuasca or psilocybin or anything. This is a powerful set of experiences.
Probably more because it happens regularly. I know, we've kind of alluded to some sex stuff recently, but my teacher Andre will say that like couples who engage in like actual tantric practice, tantric sex, when they do it in, the kind of traditional way that the Kama Sutra practice is, not just neo tantra, whatever the culture has taken and changed, but like actual tantra. And if we could totally talk about that at some point, but that like
that's a goal to do that. So that's like once we did this, that's the next obvious thing to talk about, right?
Like people will maintain states of bliss for days on end. He said for him, there's a couple couples that he knows back in Ukraine. Maybe they moved out, I don't know, but like he said between 10 and 14 days they would be in this like absolutely blissful state, as if they were practicing Vajrayana and had a wonderful, what I'm saying? So it's totally.
And there's a certain goal of like to be in that mind frame like all the time, whether you're with your partner or not. And just as part of you learn how to meditate to create those states in you.
Yeah.
So that's a subject matter to talk about for sure.
Right.
But I think he was also looking at like interpersonal connection. And it strikes me a little bit as like, we'll get back to like maybe like what Rumi had with Shamsa Tabriz or something, like these really intense transformative relationships. And so I think for me, when I think about this, if I do energy before form, for me, it's the idea like you don't really know who those people are going to be, where those people are going to show up, and how that's going to be for you. They're kind of, you could say, gifts from the Tao that just appear for you. And you get the feeling like, and again, I don't know the dude Jung, but you certainly get the feeling like he was a little probably taken aback. Like, wow, I didn't anticipate this happening. But all of a sudden, I'm having these encounters with people that are extremely powerful on different levels. I mean, his encounter with Freud was really powerful, as a mentorship, which ultimately broke up. But it's also like he was having romantic connections with people that were extremely powerful that he just probably never would have anticipated ever happening in his life. And so I just wanted to say, like, I think it's it has a different way of thinking about what relationship between people means. To me, I would frame this as very Sufism. I'd frame it as very Buddhist Tantra. You know, you don't know when you're going to meet the people who are going to be powerful influences on you, whether they're teachers or friends or people that you love or are in love with. You don't know how this is going to happen. Like, you really don't. And I think that's my idea, that the universe has its own thing going on. And the level of like social reality is doing its thing, and they don't necessarily vibe up, you know? And I wanted to like just say, like, probably for him, and we all get to think about this, it ended up being probably not a view of traditional marriage, which is one way of thinking about how a relationship works within a culture, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's based in like a certain way of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, you know, I think the ultimate idea of that is that there's like the one who will appear, right? Sometimes even in like Judeo-Christian tradition, you'll get the idea like there is like the one, and Yahweh will set you up with the one, right? Now, whatever our culture thinks about that now, I don't think people believe in that as much. But that is the root of this, right? And even as Esther Perel would point out, like, it's probably like you'd meet the one in that like way of framing things. I mean, that was the culture for a long time, was probably someone you met in your teens
Mm-hmm.
from like your hometown, who your parents probably thought was a good match. And they would be the one, right? And I looked it up because I was curious, because if you were a girl, you were in your teens most
Yeah.
likely.
Yep.
And if you were a boy, apparently I looked up like what was this like in the Middle Ages, you know? And it was like, if you're a boy, you're probably in your early 20s, depending on the class you're in and stuff like that. And then that was it. So I looked it up and I was like, well, that's one, like, obviously the underlying foundation of the culture that we're living in is that idea, right? That's it. You know, that's the underlying basis. Now we tweaked it and changed it, and we could talk about that, but that was the concept. And then, you know, as Esther Perel says, we like to reference Esther Perel because everyone loves Esther Perel. I can't tell you how many like things I get from people like, it's so great you're talking about Esther Perel.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone says it. But she says, you know, those relationships didn't last that long. Because if you're a woman, it was very likely you would die in childbirth. And if you were a guy, you'd probably die in an industrial accident or get killed in a war. I mean, they weren't long relationships. You know, they were, you know, much shorter than what people are living now. And in many ways, it was a connection between resources of families. And I think you and I have had conversations about this. These are, in many ways, love relationships. I'm not saying they're not, but they're also financial relationships, business relationships, partnerships in this way. You know, to not see that is, I think, to be naive and not look at what things really are.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a lot of pressure. And it was fascinating because I was doing the research on Jung, and I was doing one of the texts that was written about his relationship with Freud and then Sabrina Spielrein. It's called The Dangerous Method. And so I've been taking it apart really deep. There's a movie made of it with Michael Fassbender playing Jung, and Viggo Mortensen playing Freud, Keira Knightley playing Sabina Spielrein. The movie's kind of a little riffy. I don't think it really reflects like their actual lives. It kind of like takes creative liberties to make a better movie. But it was interesting in doing the research because they said, you know, even in Jung's time, there was a whole movement involved, because especially for women, if you didn't get married by a certain time, you were an old maid.
That's
And
still
you were
present in
screwed.
that's still present in a lot of cultures now, man.
Yeah. No, I know. And like, people talk about this in American culture in funny ways too. But at that time, you were going to live like a loveless, sexless, childless life. Like, you'd be just, so they had like major movements at the time of Freud and Jung when they were first meeting. And this is like the beginning of the last century, not that long ago, where they were like, yeah, this is a real problem. Because if you don't get a partner, you're a woman, like the morals are such, you're stuck, you're done, you know? And it was a real serious problem. Now, obviously this has evolved on, but this is sort of like the underlying subcurrent of the culture, how this is how the thing starts, if you want to do the anthropological part, you know, that we've been kind of like referencing here and there. And obviously people are changing this in different ways, and I think it's worthwhile looking at, but it's a certain view of the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's obviously, at least in the United States, people are still fighting over this view. There's still arguments. There's still people who want to go back to this view. You know, they want the world to be this way because that's the underlying sort of impetus of like a big part of the culture, you know?
Yeah.
And it's a belief. My point of being, it's like a belief about reality too.
Sure.
I talked with my brother about this, and I said, you know, whenever I'm going to say something with my brother, I have to get permission to say it. because he's a very private person. So I said, can I talk about this? And he said, yeah. So I have a cousin, he's born again, he's very religious. His first wife, very sad story, got cancer and passed away. You know, they had kids together. You know, the kids were basically grown, but you know, he lost her. You know, that's a terrible, painful thing, but very religious person. And so he went on and he eventually found like somebody else ultimately after a certain amount of time. I'm happy for him. He has a certain way of looking at the world, right? He's a religious person. We were in the church and I was just sitting there thinking about this. And I leaned over to my brother and I whispered, you know, if you really believed, because it was a question of like, why get married? Because they're like, you know, they're already going into their 60s. Why bother doing it? You know, but they're going to do it. And I was like, you know, I was going, well, if you really believe in this, this is your worldview, you know, then this is like a huge deal, you know? So I was like whispering this to my brother, you know, if you really believe in this, and my brother like is funny because he just went like, shh, he just shushed me. And I wasn't like taking a loudspeaker and like blasting it to the whole crowd. I was just leaning over to him privately and going, you know, and I was like, really like trying to understand, understanding it, going, okay, if that's how you feel.
Right.
And then he and I were joking about this because I said, well, I was going to like, they say like, do you have any objections? I wasn't going to jump up. I have objections to this whole thing. I don't know if I like it at all, but for you, it's good. No judgments. I might have issues with it. Then I'd sit back down again or something and he'd be pulling on my sleeve. I wasn't going to do that. I was talking very quiet. But anyways, you know, it's a certain way of looking at the world, right? So I just want to say like, that's something you get to look at for yourself. Do I believe in this? Do I believe in the one? You know, it's something to figure out, don't you think?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And like, at least as far as American culture, it's one major theme, right? It's one
Generally
world,
yeah.
Right? I suppose the other way of viewing the world, and I don't know what I think this means, but a lot of people are then, if you're not that, you're probably a biological materialist. Probably.
Which we have episodes.
Statistical odds are pretty high, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, so I was trying to do the Buddhist thing here, where you walk through and say, well, what does this view entail? You know, like if you think this way, if this is your underlying way of looking at the world, what does that mean? And I think in that sense, it means that you see people as kind of like individual biological units. There's no deeper like spiritual ties between them because those don't exist. So you don't think about it that way. And so you end up just kind of doing whatever you do romantically, sexually, and so on as these sort of little self-contained biological evolutionary units or something. And I think under the surface, that's kind of like the underlying worldview. The reason I'm bringing the contrast up is because that's not the worldview that I'm talking about. It's a different worldview. And even if you take a step back and you say, well, I don't know, you know, different people can have different attitudes about this. If we get to the point of really non-judgment, there are people who think this way. I have friends who like, this is their underlying way of looking at the world. They're biological materials. That's what it is, right?
Mm-hmm.
They have their sexual partners. They don't have particular karma with them or something. They have their romantic partners. I'm not saying those relationships aren't important to them. They are, you know, but it doesn't have the same framing because they don't see the world that way, you know, when you dig underneath, right? Love can be very real and very meaningful. It's not even to like be like, I don't think it's meaningful. It's more just to say like, it's a different way of looking at the world, like completely. Does that make sense what I'm trying to say there?
Yeah.
Yeah, completely different ways of looking at the world. I have one little, I don't know, you have something you want to say about it? What do you think?
I mean, it's a further illustration of what we said earlier. It's not what you're doing, but how you're doing it, you know? And so all the various permutations of the way in which we choose to spend our time and whom we choose to spend our time with ends up being an act of that, you know? I guess like an outgrowth.
I don't want to like, we could have our own takes on this, but I think it's really important to figure out like, what do you actually believe?
Sure.
Like, what is your underlying belief system? Because you could talk about how you spend your time and those things, and I think those are all really important. And you and I don't even have to agree at this, but for me, I'm like trying to get to the point of like, what do you actually believe? Like, what are your core sets of like who you are, what you actually believe?
Sure.
Because that's probably going to have to like inform the rest of who you are.
I don't know that remains super fixed though. Do you know what I'm saying?
I had an interesting conversation with Ryan Davenport where he said like our anthropological consultant.
That's right.
One of them. Mary Kay Ryan being the other. to give our due diligence and props to both. So, and he was like, well, most Americans, he just said this, we were talking about different stuff. He said, well, most Americans are not very self-reflective. He was
I
saying
would agree.
anthropologically.
Yeah, I
So
would
I was
agree.
like, okay. So I'm letting him do his anthropological riff. And then he said, like, because of that, they have these external identity anchors. And I guess it's an anthropological phrase. They tie their identities to certain external things.
Yeah.
And then depending on how those things go, things will turn out bad or good personally. But because they haven't really done a lot of like internal self-reflection to build up a strong sense of their own identity, which I would say like self-identity, self-concept or something, because they haven't done that, then he was saying that, it's really fragile. And so people feel incredibly insecure, right? Because it's like their self-concept is very fragile. Again, existential guardian operating system, however you want to frame it from your previous episodes,
That is a very good wrap up, because I know we're close to being the time, but of what you said right away in the beginning of the episode, that the Buddha's kind of like third mental trial or whatever it was, that he had to overcome expectations, or we'll just call them thoughts, from other people, right? And that's exactly what this is. If you have yourself tied to external things as your sense of identity, then based on how those things turn out, also you turn out. So if you identify yourself with, let's just say, a job in this case, and that job goes away for whatever reason, or you can no longer perform that job, or you are too old, or whatever the case is, there goes your identity. So
I think he's using the phrase like identity anchor, which I'd never heard before, but
yeah, like
I guess they use it in anthropology.
That myth of retirement is a myth. You haven't developed yourself the entire way through, and you are identifying yourself in reality externally, and in reality internally as a blank, as a whatever, bricklayer, like that's what you do, that therefore that is who you are. And when that is no longer there, the question remains, who are you? But we're trying to make you go internal first before you do that, so that you can do whatever you want to do. But that doesn't mean you need to be.
You have the internal identity set for you, and then you're not being dictated by these external identity anchors.
Correct. You can do whatever you want to do and still choose to be whoever you want to be. That's the one that someone will text me next week and say, you said that. And that's correct.
I got like I'm the one who has to go, but let me just take like a couple of minutes just to say this one last thing.
Sure.
And it's the capper of this section for me. Because I started thinking about this relative to like mental health and like getting even like psychology and how psychology works. So I asked a patient of mine who's involved in this stuff too. She works in the business where they hire a lot of psychologists. And I was like, what's the worldview of the people who are doing the psychology? And she was like, it really is what you're talking about. They're biological materialist worldview people. That's their framework from which they come from. And I thought, okay, so that's interesting. And then I said, for me, I had, my psych mentor, Michael Schnur, who I talk about on occasion here, right? Who, deeply love and deep gratitude. And it'll make me cry if I talk about it too much, because he helped me out so much. But the thing was, he didn't impose that worldview on me, and he didn't have that worldview kind of assumed. So I got kind of lucky in that. Like, he traveled to India, he traveled to China, he was open to other stuff. So in a funny way, the more unorthodox parts of who I was, at times he was concerned. I can't say he wasn't concerned at all, but he also was like very accepting of it. He was like, okay, this guy has a different way of looking at the world. And he could meet me in some place, because he had gone all around India and he was interested in Indian culture. And he went to China to study Chinese body work, at some point. He borrowed my TCM books and like went, and I never gave them back. But, he did this stuff. And I've wondered about that too. So I want to just include that as a last capper on this part, because we're talking about the two dominant worldviews. And I almost felt like, wow, even in terms of like mental health, if you're going to get help from somebody and they're not coming from a similar or open to the worldview that you're coming from, or coming from something that can accept that worldview, I think that's a real problem. And I just wanted to throw that out there in terms of seeking help. And I don't think people ask that question, but if like, I thought to myself, if I was going to see somebody who really was like biological materials person, that was their home base framework, that would have been really bad for me.
I
So
think the
slow
hard
down.
part though, the hard part would to know where someone is coming from. And if you were seeking someone's help in identifying some of the things that were important to you, you inherently don't know what are some of the things that are
I
important to you.
know. That's
So
so
it's
tricky.
it's
Yeah.
tough.
I
That's
go back and I look at it, it's like, wow, if he wouldn't have been accepting of who I was, because in a certain sense, I was developing a Zen, Taoist, Sufi, Kabbalist, Buddhist, Tantric worldview. That's what I was doing. Ultimately, that's what those sessions were all about.
mm,
If I were to summarize them as something. And if he wasn't open to that, then that would have been a real problem. And I go back and I think, how would that even have worked? So talking with my patient, I was like, oh, wow, that would have been a real problem for me. If, that would have been really difficult. I don't know how
mm,
that would have happened. I don't think it would have worked out well for me. So I just
yeah.
wanted to throw it out there because I asked her about it and she was like, no, it's really, this is the framework of people. Because we only really have two major worldviews in the United States. There's a kind of religious one, which I think was the first one I was referencing. My cousin has it. That one's kind of on the decline, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And then the other one is the one that's more on the upsurge,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Probably underneath, if you go down to the surface, this is how people think. But like some dude like Jung doesn't think that way. That's his breakup with Freud, is on this point. He breaks up with him because he doesn't have that same worldview. I mean, if I write a book about it, that's the thing that breaks them up in the end. Jung's like, no, I don't see the world that way. I
Hmm.
don't have this worldview that you have, without even judging it one way or the other. And then, since we're talking about Jung and mental health, and I asked my patient the question, I was like, well, what's the attitude? What's the worldview? And she's like, it's this one. And I was like, wow, that would have been really tough for me. So anyways, I just wanted to share it
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
think it's connected. It's not an easy question, but I wanted to pop it out there for people.
Yeah.
All right, I guess that's it. Thanks, Daniel, for letting me get in that last thing out. But I think it's the capper on this thing
Of
for me
course.
on some
Yeah.
level. How do you seek help? You have to figure out what the worldview is. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, beautiful. Thanks. Thanks everyone for listening too.
Thanks
I don't
everybody
want to steal your bit.
listening.
I'm just particularly grateful today.
Yeah, no, it's good to,
Yeah.
yeah, there's more, but we're not going to do it. Okay.
Yeah.
So, as always, hit us up on Instagram, Gin and Tantra podcast, YouTube, watch the video, like it, subscribe, share, all that kind of stuff. Apple, leave a review. GinandTantra@gmail.com. Website will be coming at some point soon. We are trying to, make this enterprise take off like the USS Enterprise, and that would make me, I don't know.
I'll put you as Captain Kirk. That's totally fine. Just don't make me Mr. Spock or something. I don't want to
No,
think.
no, I was gonna go with Data. That's
You're gonna be Data.
yeah, for sure. But I'm probably actually gonna be what's the co-captain from Jean-Luc Picard? What's his co-captain's name?
Is it Riker?
Yeah, Riker. That's
I'd
probably
probably end up being that like lame dude from Don't Stand By Me or something. I'll end up being that dude. This is not a good deal for me.
Okay, fine. We'll pick a different one.
I like the new generation though. I like the next generation. That was good.
There we go. All right. Well, as always, Eric, thank you so much.
I can't claim Picardness. I can't.
No,
That's
yeah, it's
bold.
tough to
It's
do,
too
man.
bold.
Patrick Stewart
It's
got it
too
going
bold.
on.
Yeah, it's too bold.
Anyways, Eric, as always, thank you so much. Audience,
Thank
thank you so much for listening. You know how to get a hold of us. Show us you love us once in a while. We appreciate it. We do love y'all. We're very grateful for the listeners and for all the passive buyers who come and go. We will see you soon. And as always, for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll catch y'all on the next one.